Hello, and welcome back to our Gait for Human Potential series. I'm Carol Montgomery, physical therapist, somatic educator, and Integral Human Gait expert. The name of today's instructional video is called Passive Knee Stretch. This video will help those of you who are suffering from knee pain, especially when the knee is trying to bend. For instance, if you are trying to go from a standing to a sitting position and your knee doesn't quite bend as well and it might be painful, this might be the video for you. Or if you are having pain upon climbing up stairs or up curbs, this also might be quite helpful. And for those of you who are trying to increase your range of motion after a total knee replacement, this also might be very helpful. Now, there are two things that you'll need for this movement exploration. The first is a chair with a firm seat. It's not necessary that it needs to have a seat back, but it might be comfortable for you. But the base of the chair upon which you sit needs to be rather firm. The second thing that you'll need is some type of cloth. And the cloth could be like we use in class. We use a sheet of some kind, torn, made of making a strap. You could also use a scarf that you would wear around your neck. It's something that doesn't actually give. In contrary, what you don't want to be using is one of those stretchy kind of bands. That won't serve us very well for us during this movement exploration. So I'll give you a moment or two to collect a chair with a firm seat and then some type of cloth. In our movement explorations, if you've been watching our video series, we start with some type of pre-assessment. Again, this pre-assessment is about developing your muscle, and I put that in quotation, your muscle of awareness, or your ability to attend and pay attention to different aspects of yourself, so that after we do the intervention or the movement exploration, we want to come back and recheck to see if there's been any change in those areas that we assessed initially. Those could be range of motion, it could be ease of movement, and it also could be quality of pain. Or it also could be the quality of weight bearing or the sense of alignment or sense of power. So we qualitatively start to kind of get a sense of what kind of impact that movement has on us in order that we might then consciously be able to choose something different that would allow us then to attain a higher level of function, of ease, and most important, I think a real joy. So it's not until we lose that ability and freedom of movement that we really can't appreciate it until it's gone. So we want to give you some hints, some cues. We explore different gateways or opportunities or openings in order to get some of that sweet movement back. So we're going to start first in our pre-assessment with standing. So if you've been sitting, please come to standing. And just notice how wide you chose. If you look down at your feet, notice just how wide the space is between your feet. When you stand up, is it customary for you to be narrow, feet close together, little space? Or is it your habit to keep your feet far apart? You also may notice that you might have weight on one side of your foot more than the other, or your footprint may be heavier on one side or the other, especially if you were on one of those Tempur-Pedic foam cushions. And if we asked you to step off of the cushion, we would start to see there would be an impression left on one side versus the other. Now, in your imagination, I want you to sense that you could have, holding in your two hands, suitcases. So your hands are holding on to two small suitcases, but they have some kind of weight to them. Your elbows are straight or extended down by your side. Now, I would like you to place these suitcases right down by either side of your foot. Okay? So two suitcases, one in each hand. Just allow your knees to bend and put the suitcases down. And then release the suitcases and stand back up. Now we're going to pick those suitcases back up again, and just notice if you favor that you like to go to one side as you lower, the footprint may get a little lower on one, deeper, on one side. Try that. How easy is it for you to let your knees bend? And then pick up your suitcases. You're standing tall with the suitcases at your side. Yes. Good. And put the suitcases down one more time and just kind of get a sense which knee is more easy in the bend. You might feel that they have the same range of motion, but the quality of one knee bending is just a little better than the other, and there's definitely one side that could improve. Good. So you're standing. That's right, upright. Now, this next time, what I want you to do is I want you to take a step position, or what we would call a staggered foot position, so that one foot is in the rear and the other foot is forward. So for all of us, I'm going to have the left, let's go the left foot in the rear and the right foot forward. And let your weight shift into the foot in the rear. In this case, the scenario, it'll be the left foot. And I want you to bend your knee. Just kind of, you can bend both knees. It's not keeping both of them straight. And now I want you to bend both knees at the same time. Most of the weight is the one on the rear. And then straighten. Several times, bend and straighten. Bend and straighten. Good. Just again, getting a sense of the quality, the range of motion. Maybe it's painful for you. Maybe there's a stiffness for you. Maybe you just don't feel confident in really shifting your weight back into that foot to begin with, let alone bend. So that might be a knee that we might want to improve. Okay, let's see what the other side is like. We'll compare. So change over so that you have the right foot is in the rear, the left foot forward. Shift the weight into the right foot. Start to bend both knees, lowering your sit bones down toward the floor. That's kind of the direction we're going. So the ankle bends, the knee is bending, of course the hip is bending as well. Torso is growing shorter, and then straighten your knee and you grow a little taller. Bending both knees again, sensing the quality of this knee. Range of motion. Maybe it feels good up to a certain point, or maybe you're one of those people where it starts off great, then something kind of wonky happens in the middle, and then at the end it feels a lot better. And then you come back up. And if you want to go back over to the other side with the left foot in the rear. Try it a couple more times. So I would like for you to get a clear sense. If you had a knee that you would like to improve the quality, the range of motion, if you had a knee that you could improve, which one would it be? Okay, have one? All right. So make sure you have your strap and your chair, and we'll get started. Now, I want to coach you through the first of 3 separate components that we are going to be eventually putting together during this movement exploration. The first is how we are going to wrap the knee. Now, the wrapping of this knee is very unique and special and was first introduced to us through our training in Bones for Life. So this comes from the work of Ruthie Alon in her Movement Intelligence Certification Program. So you want to take your cloth and you want to find the middle of the cloth. Now, you're going to be in a seated position. I'm going to demonstrate this in a standing position so that you can really get a close-up of what I'm doing around the knee itself. All right? So I'll go slow. We'll wrap and unwrap several times so that you kind of get the hang of it before we actually do the movement exploration. So find the middle of the cloth. I'm just going to put my foot on a chair so that you can see my knee. And as you're sitting, your foot is right underneath your knee. Your knee is bent at a 90-degree angle. I'm going to take the center of my cloth and I'm going to put it below my knee cap. So it's actually going to be on my shin bone or the tibia. I'm going to take my wrap, I'm going to pull it around my shin bone, cross in the back, and now I have 2 sides of my cloth or my strip. And then I'm going to let the strip come up around my thigh or my femur, and then I'm going to cross again. And then after I cross, I'm just going to kind of twist maybe once or twice. And now I'm just going to hold on near my knot with the ends of the strap, almost like a reins of the horse. And I can pull on it. Okay? Let's try it again. Find the middle of the cloth. Take the middle of the cloth, and you can make it wide. You can put it below the kneecap, around the tibia, the shin bone, cross behind the calf, the upper calf. Hold on to either side of the strips. Bring it up over the thigh bone. Cross on top of the thigh bone. Twist once, maybe twice, and hold on to either side of the strip of cloth near the knot or the twisted area. Okay? That's the first component. That's the wrap. Let's begin the second component of the seated strap stretch. The first thing you want to do is you want to walk to the most forward part of your chair. And we do this walking with what we call the buttock walking or the sit bone walking. So we would tilt ourselves in such a way that we would lift one sit bone up and move it forward. Then we tilt to the other side, lift that sit bone up, move it forward, and keep walking forward until that you've reached the front part of your chair. Your feet will be behind your knees and you'll be sitting up tall. Okay? Let's rewrap the knee. I'm going to rewrap the knee. You probably already have yours wrapped. So I find the middle. I go below the kneecap and I'm on the shin bone or the tibia. I go along the sides of the tibia. I cross my strips behind the knee or behind the upper calf. I take the strips and I pull it up in the direction around my thigh. I cross and I let that crossing of the strips be close to my thigh, and then I twist the cloth 1 or 2 times. So this just gives me the security that when I do or pull on this strip, that I'm not going to lose the integrity of this nice snug wrap. It's not too tight. The purpose of it isn't a tourniquet. It just feels supportive. Okay? Component 1. Component 2. I'm going to put my side view to the camera so that you could see me. And have notice that my elbows are bent, but not quite at 90 degrees. They're a little more than 90 degrees. This is so that I can get used to, I can start to use my bicep, and I can start to pull on my strips of cloth, and it starts to lift my heel from the ground. Now, my ball of my foot is still on the ground. So just several times, I want you to get this sense that the strip of cloth being powered by my arms, but also by my shoulder blades. Start to get a sense that I could start to not only bend at the elbow, but I could pull back with my shoulders. And I almost have this sense that I'm leaning back into the back of the chair if I had one. And as I do that, I allow my heel to peel off from the floor. The arch peels off from the floor. If I lean or pull a little further, then the ball, then the toe pads come, and now my foot is off of the ground. I'm going to put it back on the ground, but I'm going to use the strips of cloth to guide it back down. So I'm going to put my toe pads down, the ball of my foot down, the arch, the heel. And now I have released the tension from the cloth, and I'm sitting tall. So that's the second component. We're going to do that several times so that you can really get a sense that there is the effort is coming from the upper back and the upper torso, and just the sheer movement of moving back, leaning back, is what is starting to pull on the cloth that then begins to detach the foot from the floor. And we're detaching it in a very special way. Heel, then arch, then ball, then toe pads. So let's just do that several times. Begin to pull on the cloth. You take the slack out of the cloth. And as the elbows and the shoulder blades and the torso starts to lean back, the heel starts to be lifted from the ground. It's passively. I'm not lifting my knee under my own muscular effort. The arch, the ball, the toe, and the toes just hang down. They're not pointed towards the shin bone. They just drop down. Let them hang. The lowering phase, super important here. The lowering phase, toe pads touch first. Feel how the toe pads anchor into the ball of the foot. The ball of the foot anchors into the arch. The arch anchors into the length of the heel. Okay? So that's the second component. Now, this third component I want to add has to do with what is happening in the lumbar spine and with the opposite leg. So first, let's talk about the lumbar spine. When we speak of the lumbar spine, we know that those last 5 vertebrae in our back. Now, to find those very easily, if you go to where your waistband is or the top of your pelvis and you slide your hand straight across. So I'm using my index finger, I'm sliding straight across, and I just lay my hand flat. That's going to be your lumbar spine. Okay? So the lumbar spine has this natural incurve to it. So it's not real flat and rounded, but it's not super arched either. All right? When it's in its neutral position, it's called lordosis. All right? So what we want to add in this third component is we want to change this lordosis. We want it to start to bow out. Or another way of saying that is if I were laying down on the floor and you asked me to tilt my pelvis or to roll across my sit bones, then I would start to incrementally start to feel pressure move from the top of my waist into my low back. And so my curve back here would no longer be bowed, it would be flat. The other way that you can get a sense that is changing something in the lordosis, making it less incurve and more round, is that the breastbone, belly button, and pubic bone, that imaginary line that we speak of in another movement series, that line, when we start to fold that line, or in short, it's about taking your end of your breastbone and the top of your pubic bone and bringing the top of the pubic bone and the end of the breastbone together. When you shorten here in front, it has a reciprocal and opposite impact here in the lumbar spine. So we move from lordosis, sitting tall, to not just leaning back, but we're going to round ourselves back as we lift the leg. The other aspect has to do with the leg that is non-wrapped. So the leg that is non-wrapped, the foot of the non-wrapped leg stays planted on the ground. When we do the movement, there is power, there's energy, there's a downward sensation coming in, planting in that foot. So we're planting the foot as we're rounding the lumbar spine. Okay, so let's try this third component. So I have the ends of my strap, and I'm now going to start to initiate this movement by rolling back on my sit bones, a posterior pelvic tilt, maybe you would know it as that, letting the pelvis start to round or move in this rotation, counter rotation movement, feeling the incurve in the low back, shortening in the front, in the belly side. And as I do that, the weight, it's like I'm a teeter-totter. I'm moving back, and because I'm a closed system, I'm a closed chain, it pulls on the wrap pulls on the leg then begins to lift from the ground. And I'm intentionally keeping the foot on the ground, grounded. There is some energy there, pushing down. Not just the ball of the foot, but the flat foot itself, from the heel to the ball. Toes are twinkle free. Okay? Coming back, I start to roll the pelvis, roll over my sit bones. Incurve is starting to return. Soon my toe pads will be on the ground, the ball of my foot, the arch of my foot, the heel of my foot. And now I'm upright, I'm stacked onto my sit bones. My incurve of my lumbar spine is restored. The tension out of my upper back and arm is free. My grip is loose. Now we'll try that just 3 more times. So we initiate this third component is the initiator. The pelvis rotates, coming around your sit bones, rounding the low back, letting the heel lift, taking up even more tension in the cloth so that the ball of the foot lifts, the toes lift, and I have firmly my opposite unwrapped foot is down on the ground. And I start to return not by through the foot, because my foot is just hanging. I'm letting the strip carry the weight. And like a teeter-totter, my pelvis is rotating and the end of the teeter-totter where my foot is returns to the ground. And again, rounding. Feeling how my arms pull, my heel lifts, the toes dangle. They were the last thing that would lift. It's so seductive to want to lose pressure underneath the foot on the ground, but call yourself back to that awareness. Feel your footprint. Reversing the movement, letting the toes land first, letting yourself imprint through the ball, the arch, the heel, till the heel is down. Release the tension from the wrap and sit tall. So let's see what impact, if any, that this had on your ability to bend your knee, what the quality is. So I'm going to unwrap. Come to standing. Imagine you had your 2 suitcases in hand. Let's see what it's like to lower the 2 suitcases down to the ground. And it feels like my fist, actually. I have short handles on my suitcase now, and so it feels like my suitcase can go lower to the ground for me. Let's check what it was like in the quality of bend. Remember, we chose the leg that we wanted to improve was the leg in the rear. Most of my weight then shifts into the foot of the rear. And now both knees can start to bend. And for me, wow, I really feel a nice quality of bend. Not just that my knee improved, but it's like my sit bones can go down. But look how the bend of my ankle is also being able to appreciate, to really, for me, join in that movement. And we'll talk a little bit more of why that was really important. How this movement is so necessary for squatting. Okay? So that's the passive knee bend. You're free, of course, to do it on the other side. And this next section, we'll talk about our anatomical and biomechanical gems or pearls that I like to refer to, of why this movement matters and what were some of the constraints that we used in this movement exploration, and what were the gateways, we like to call those. These are openings within our own gait, G-A-I-T, that seems so spontaneous and unconscious, and that we know if we improve certain individual parts that we know are interlinked or interdependent with one another. They act like gateways so that when you open and free one independent part, it actually is translating into not an independent, but an interdependent. And this gateway or this opening makes more usable the skeleton in such a way that your walking becomes more stable. Your walking becomes more pleasurable. It's more easy. It's effortless. It feels good. And so that then when you approach a curb, you can bend that knee and put it on the step and step right on up. Okay? So let's take a look at why it matters. Now, the top two reasons why we think that the passive knee bend movement exploration matters is that first, it restores that very necessary, healthy pattern between knee bending and straightening and the in curve and the out curve of the lumbar spine. And the second is relieving patterns of chronic knee compression. So I want to show you anatomically how this is being accomplished during the passive knee bending. Let's look first at relief of chronic knee compression. So we're going to turn to our models so that you can see it both from a skeletal perspective, and then also we'll look at it from a muscular perspective as well. So first, skeletal. I want to turn your attention to taking a look at the back of the knee. All right. So you have the condyles of the back of the knee, and if you look close at the condyles themselves, the outside condyle is actually shorter than the inside condyle. Okay? So remember, it's this area where we have articular cartilage that we would actually start to wear out or become like bone on bone. And what happens is that when we start to lose what's happening here in the brown area, so I'll open the knee just a little bit. These are actually the menisci. There's two of them in inside, medial, outside, lateral. And they actually have some depth to them. And they actually form a ring so that it makes like a fake or a faux socket so that the ball or the end of the thigh bone, there's ball down here that it can actually seat in the and on top of the tibia itself. So when we have chronic knee compression, and this is the area of which our wrap has taken place, that there's too much load bearing that goes on and it stays. Compression is not bad. Compression is a healthy thing that allows bone signaling to make good bone. Now, the problem lies is when the compression doesn't stop and it's chronic. And so we are meant to compress and relieve, open and close. It is the essence of inhale, exhale. We see it repeat over and over in the human body. So what we want to be able to do in this passive knee stretch is the quality of how we wrap and the contact that goes behind the back of the shin bone, because when we cross here and then we come up and around the thigh bone, we actually have a chance to seat the thigh bone into the socket a little bit better. So just anatomically, the wrap itself allows the thigh bone to seat more securely into its socket. that alone will make things feel better. So that's the skeletal connection. Let's look at the muscular connection. Now, when we look at the muscular connection, I want you to have a look at this picture here on the back. If I zoom out just a little bit, this would be the gluteus maximus, and then we would know the hamstrings coming down the back of the thigh, and then giving rise to coming into the calf is the gastroc, and then the soleus, and then of course the ankle bone would be distal or below that. But let's go over here to this side. Let's zoom in a little bit more here. So here the hamstrings take their origin off the sit bone. Remember we'll discuss a little bit more later about the lumbar and knee connection, but we were rolling off of those sit bones. We were changing how we use our sit bones in the movement pattern. Now, right now, this hamstring has been cut, all right? But if we follow this down, this is a deeper part of the hamstring. There's 3 of them. And then zero in right here. This is where we pick up the cut version, and there's a hamstring that goes on the outside of the knee, and there's 2 of them that come on the inside of the knee. So remember, our strap was crossing as we started to come up above and around our thigh. So there's some compression that we're doing into the tendons of these hamstrings. But most important, I think, how we are possibly relieving the chronic knee compression has to do with the gastroc. Now, the gastroc muscles themselves cross 2 joints. They actually participate in knee flexion, but they also help to point the foot or the toe. So when we look closer into here, this is the area right here where we put the strap around the front of the shin bone. And then we took each strip and we went behind the shin bone or the top of the knee, and we crossed right here. And with that cross, and then the strip of cloth crosses around the back of the upper thigh and along the side of the thigh, and it's in that crossing and this crossing right in here that we begin to put a little bit of compression on these tendons. And proprioceptively, that means how your brain is reading the necessary need to have tension in these muscles or not gets inhibited. So when we begin to initiate movement from different places, we begin to inhibit the tension that's really needed in these musculatures. So when that happens, then the skeletal aspect that we looked at previously then becomes even more important, so that the ball, which is located at the end of the femur or the thigh bone, can seat into the tibia. Okay? So I think that's how we are relieving that chronic knee compression. Let's have a look at that lumbar and knee connection. So one of the things that we want to point out, again, in the lumbar spine, we have this normal lordosis. It should be present. There should be some incurve. We're not always looking to have a flat back. That's not our goal. We want a spine that's dynamic and that can change. Because when we start to bend our knees and start to lower ourselves down to the ground, we need to be able to change our incurve here. So there's something really special about the design architecturally or structurally of the knee joint and the lumbar spine that allows movement the strongest in one plane of motion, and that is the sagittal plane of motion. So by sagittal, that means that we are able to what we would call flex. All right, this would be an example of I'm standing on the ground, and here would be my sit bones up here, and I would be lowering my seat to sit into the toilet. All right? So that is one way in which we actually bend our knee. Another way in which we bend our knee is when we begin to take the knee forward as though that we were going to stand and put our foot up on a stool or up on a stair. So that is another way that we bend our knee. Okay? So each one of these have the same aspect of knee bending. There should still be the forward and backward bending that goes on, and the rotation or side to side tilt is very, very little in the knee. In fact, it only has a small amount of rotation at the very end of straightening. That's what seats the ball of the bottom of the knee into, or I should say the bottom of the femur, into the top of the knee bone or the shin bone or the tibia. Okay? So that bending, flexion, and extension is the same amount of motion that goes forward and back in the lumbar spine. When you bend forward, this is where the lumbar spine itself loses its incurve. And when you come back upright, past neutral, this is lumbar lordosis. And then when you bend backwards, that's what's called extension or deepening the curve. Let's talk about where we begin to use movement initiation and the concept of constraints in passive knee bending. So when we begin to initiate the movement, originally we talked about being able to bend the elbows, and as we bend the elbows and we brought the shoulder girdle back, that began to actually lift the leg passively. So we initiated from here. But then we started to do something a little bit different. I asked you to start to have that same pulling sensation, bending here at the elbow, but we began to initiate it through the rolling over the sit bone. So as you begin to allow the sit bone to roll back and the whole pelvic girdle starts to tilt, and then it even makes it so much easier to allow the torso to come back, the shoulder girdle to come back, the elbow to come back. And it also passively started to unlock this lumbar lordosis and this area where we can actually get chronic compression as well as knee compression. Most people think that chronic knee compression is only on a bent knee, but if you are a type of person that hyperextends your knee, that you have the ability to really super straighten your knee or it bows backwards when you're standing, that also controls a lot of compression into the lumbar spine with the facets, because that takes your pelvis and tips it the other way so that you're sitting in a different place in the sit bones rather than on the peak or the mountaintop or the top of the sit bone. So movement in that sagittal or that forward and back plane that gives us what we call flexion and extension of the knee, or flexion of the spine or the trunk and extension, those two are mirrored within the knee and the lumbar spine. So if you can decompress in this movement exploration, we decompressed with that cloth compression of the knee. And at the same time, when we initiated movement through the sit bones, we are rolling over the sit bones, rolling over the origin of the hamstrings. But I asked you to do one thing else. I asked you for a constraint. And a constraint is that concept of where I want you to keep this one place still as you're moving the rest of the body parts. And that place was your unwrapped knee and foot. That foot was still placed onto the ground. So you had a closed circuit of your strap pulling on the thigh bone, which allowed the foot to come away from the floor. But the other foot, I really asked you to keep that foot planted. Don't let it lose contact. The fact that you don't let it lose contact and that you're actually pushing down, the fact of pushing down also ensures that the lumbar spine can change its shape and its lordosis, and it can get long. So now we've got two main sources of which we're changing this chronic compression of the lumbar spine associated with the passive knee bending. One comes from the foot on the floor, and the other comes from the sit bone rolling. Okay? Now, we've got one more thing to talk about, and that's this business of how we asked the foot of the wrapped knee to leave the floor. Let's talk about that next. So I had you begin to pull on the strap, and the strap, which was connected to the thigh bone and the shin bone, began to start to lift, start to get a little bit lighter. We started to take up some slack. And in that slack, as we started to pull and lift, the heel started to lift from the ground. Now, for some of you, you might have experienced the whole foot started to leave the ground. But I asked you to really let the toes stay down. Let the first thing that leaves the ground be the heel. Then see if you could pull a little more, have the arch. Pull a little more, have the ball. Pull a little more so that the toe pads would be the last thing to come off the ground. And then in the return, we did the same thing. Toe pad, ball, arch, then heel. Now, that sequence of lowering was real important. Now, when we passively let the foot hang down, we are actually letting the back of the musculature here, that is the soleus or the calf muscle combined with the gastroc, and this compression on these upper tendons, we're actually passively squeezing in this area up above that allows the foot to dangle a little bit. And so when we allow the foot to dangle, we kind of reset this area in here. So that when the first motion that starts to come down is in the ball of the toes and in the ball of the foot, there's a letting go of not just the back of the musculature here. There is this initiation or a qualitative shift of being able to let the socket of that's at the end of the shin bone, the socket at the end of the shin bone, to roll over the ball of the foot. So you've got this series of balls and sockets cascading down from the hip to the knee to the ankle bone. And when you lightly start to come down, you start to train this kind of quality of lengthening of the back of the calf and across of the ankle, but across the bottom of the foot as well. Because most people don't realize that the musculature in the back of the calf that goes into the Achilles tendon, that goes into the ball of the foot, gives rise to something on the bottom of the foot that's called the plantar fascia. So if the plantar fascia or plantar fasciitis or foot pain, arch pain, toe pain, any of this gets tight, your calf will qualitatively be tight too. So now, not only does chronic knee compression of the joint of the knee is involved, but now you've got some things happening at the bottom of the foot. So this passive knee stretch has marked potential, capability, open doors for people who actually have chronic foot pain and can't get enough ankle bend. And we need ankle bend in two places. When we are standing and we go to sit down, when we go to sit down, like on the toilet and our foot is on the ground, do you see here how this ankle right here has to fold in the front? Or when we were standing and I asked you to put your imaginary suitcases down on the ground, there's this kind of folding that has to happen even more so. And you can see this angle starts to change. Now, when we are walking and taking a step, that this leg becomes the standing leg and your opposite leg starts to take a step, there'll be a point in time as your leg that is in the air is moving forward, and at that same time, the shin bone has to move forward on a long foot, a long steady foot. And there's a small amount of ankle bend. There's a small amount of ankle bend, about 10 degrees. If you miss that, it will play havoc in your ability for joint compression of the knee and of the lumbar spine and certainly of the hip. So you probably guessed by my enthusiasm that I am very excited about this passive knee bending movement exploration. It, along with some others, are key in my movement vocabulary, and I do this quite often. And it has been remarkable in restoring a lot of my own lumbar mobility and relieving not only chronic joint pain, but I really feel like I have the strength and alignment that when I go to exercise, I get a better outcome. I really can target the musculature that I'm looking for because my alignment is absolutely spot on. And I'm not creating more joint compression with my strength training. So I hope that's been a helpful explanation for you, and you will be very surprised should you do this movement exploration just one time a week for a month. And I'm sure you will be able to really appreciate and understand more deeply why passive knee bending really matters. Thank you so much, and we'll see you on our next instructional video. Have a great day.